What's up, everyone? I'm Jasmine Harper,
What's up, everybody? I'm Corey Ritter
and we're your host
of the VoiceBox.
The VoiceBox is an original WNCU podcast
that serves as an outlet for community members like you to connect with local businesses, entrepreneurs, and resource centers.
We're here to inspire, share stories, and uplift voices.
Welcome to the VoiceBox.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 5 of the VoiceBox. I'm your host, Corey, and today I'm with
Dr. Eric Kelly III.
All right, and the first question we have for you today is, when did you start painting? When did you know that you was an artist?
Well, it all started in church. I was one of those kids who, I ran around the church, I was 4. And my grandmother gave me an ink pen. And I don't know why, but I started drawing. And when I got in the 5th grade, she said that she wished she would have kept the picture I drew, because I drew a picture of the choir. And she said that the people in the choir on the piece of paper that I was drawing looked like the people in the choir. And so that's when I started. I started with ink pens, and then when I became 7, my great-grandfather wanted me to be a lawyer. He said all families need a lawyer, and so I was intent on being an artist, and I was staying in his house at the time. And he brought these giant books, law books, into my bedroom, and he said, "You might as well get ready. This is what you're going to be using. You got to learn how to read these books." And so he walked out, and I took the books and made a table so I could draw, and put me a board on it so that I could draw. And so about a couple of months later, he came back in the room and he said, what are you going to be? And I said, "I'm going to be an artist." And he said, "No, I want you to be a lawyer." And I said, "I don't want to be a lawyer." My grandmother, who raised me, had taught me that no matter what you want to do, tell people what you want to do. And so even at 7 years old, I don't want to say bossy. I want to say I was intent on telling people what I wanted to do. I've always been strong on what is my identity. And so then he said, "Well, if you want to be an artist, where is your work?" And I think he thought that he had me. But I went to my bed, pulled the papers out, put them on the bed, and said, "This is some of my work." And he looked at the work, and then he just walked out of the room. I thought it was over, right? And so he walked out of the room, and then another month later, he came back in and he said, "Well, if you're going to be an artist, you need to know what an artist is." And then he took me to a museum. My great-grandfather was a wealthy man, and anytime the family wanted to go somewhere or do something, he would always say, "Let's go." I never saw him say, "How much money we got to go?" He worked as a Pullman porter at one time in Virginia. He worked on the shipyards also. And so I was raised by him. He was like my father. And he would carry me to the court system from Scarborough Nursery School every morning when I was 5. And we would sit in there, and that was his pastime, to watch what was going on in the court system. And so he took me to some museums, and then when he came back, he said, "Well, we're going to start you a museum." And I said, "Well, what I got to do?" And he said, "You got your pictures, put them on the wall." And so I took some thumbtacks and stuff and started putting stuff on the walls. And he says, "Is that what you saw at the museum, paper on the wall?" And I said, "No, Papa." We called him Papa. I said, "No." I said, "Everything was they were in frames. And he said, well, you can't put anything on this wall without them being framed. And that was my first remembrance of my childhood, and that was learning about museums. And one of the things that he told me that has been key to my growth is he said that don't give your work away. He said only sell to collectors because they will know where it is and they will protect it. And so what he did was really turn me into a collector of my work. And because when people are asking me for my work, I'm always looking at, because he said, make sure you put the value that you feel like on the work. That's the value. And so I've always, when somebody said they wanted something and they didn't want to pay me, I just kept the work. So now that I'm close to 70 years old, probably have 3,000, maybe 4,000 pieces of my work at the museum that he created here in Durham, North Carolina.
What museum?
The Eric Kelly Museum. It's named after me, yes. It's named after me. At one time, my grandmother was running it, but it really has been a museum that has my writings and has my artwork. When I was in college here, I just pretty much was putting work on the walls of the museum.
That's really cool. I think that's really dope that you was able to like basically have like a creative playground and like just showcase every piece of work that you deemed that's showable. I think that's really cool. So my next question is, all these paintings around us, they're really beautiful. They're really like thought-provoking. What inspired the body of work featured around us?
Well, I have to always go back to my high school when we talk about my work. Back in I want to say 74, my art teacher, Sandra Dowd, asked me to do a piece of work for this book. And it was pen and ink, but it was with the Skrill, the other pen ink where you stick it in there and you didn't use that ink. And I drew a matador and a bullfight. And, I was thinking about that the other day. And the piece that I drew then is the same style that I'm doing right now. And I should say similar, because I like blacks and white lines. The boldness of the blacks, the hotness of the white lines, and I like the mark, the space relations of objects. And so when I was in high school, my art teacher, my history teacher, and my English teacher corralled me into the teacher's lounge. And y'all probably don't do teachers' lounges now, but in those days, when the teachers took you into the teacher's lounge, you was in trouble. You did something. But what they did in that room with me, my art teachers say I was cheating the world, first of all, because every day I would play around and have a good time, but then when it was time for the art piece to happen, I would come in the classroom, I wouldn't say nothing to nobody. And I would sit down, and whatever the project was, I would do that project right then. And she said, this is so unfair, because you do the best project in the school, but you're not developing, you're just walking in and sit. In other words, I was doing the raw art thing. And so they said they weren't gonna graduate me. And I was like, y'all can't do that. And they said, well, you gotta have English, and you gotta have history, or you won't graduate. And then they said, well, what we want you to do is to draw for our classes. So I ended up doing a lot of pictures on Macbeth. My history teacher was a black history teacher, and so I did a lot of work in black history. And the black history pieces that I began to do started giving me the idea of what identity was. as a black man, because I knew about world history, but I really didn't know about black history. And so as I began to draw and paint, I started looking at the different artists and the different movements that was going on in time. So when you ask me about the work here, it's a combination of me working through different periods of art in my life. I started out, because I'm from Durham, North Carolina, I started out doing stuff similar to what Ernie Barnes was doing, because he was the only artist that we knew of. Elongated pieces, elongated arms and legs. And then when I got to college, I started doing realism pieces. I was doing pastels, and the pastels, when I first started doing pastels, it seemed to me that people was calling the pastel work caricatures. And later on, I realized why they was calling them caricatures. It's a way of devaluing your work, saying that your work is cartoonish. And so what I decided to do was to make them large, so that you would have to look at the beauty, or you would have to look at the line work, or you would have to look at the color in my art. So while you're thinking that it's something else, it's dominating your space to make you see the art. And so when you talk about this work here, I went through different movements. Again, realism, and then I was in the looking at the movements, and I came across Farvism. And Farvism, which means wild beast, I didn't want to be associated with the wild beast being a black man at that time, when I learned about the work. Yeah. But Farvism is a style that utilizes a lot of color. And it was only a movement that lasted only 5 years. And I've been doing this movement for probably about 20 years. You have to understand, as an artist, and you're going through the different movements, and you're looking at the Picassos, you're looking at the Rembrandts, you're looking at the Andre Matisse, you're looking at all these guys, the Michelangelos, you're looking at all these guys, and you're trying to figure, how are you going to get in the canon, the art canon? How are you going to leave your mark?
How can young artists stay inspired to lead themselves instead of following other people?
By doing what I did before I got to North Carolina Central University. Because of Sandra Dowd, Miss Cousins, and Miss Corbett, I won the best artist in the state of North Carolina, given by the Durham Links, which was a prestigious organization here in Durham. And what happened was I started to get letters to go to school. And so my great-grandfather says, it's 12 things you ought to do in life. I'm just going to talk about 3. Number 1 is to think. Number 2 is to sail, and number 3 is to research. And so the answer to your question is to research what you're doing. No matter what it is, do the research. You're always going to be selling who you are, period. No matter who you are and what you're doing, you're always going to be selling. But really to think. So I did research on North Carolina Central University. And back in the 70s, they had some of the top black artists, teachers here. And so when I found that out, I took my portfolio. And my portfolio, what people don't understand is, you know how you're in high school and you have those long halls? Okay. Because they stopped me at the beginning of the year, by the end of the year, I had work from one end of the hall down the hallway on both sides. Okay, so that's what I did. And so I had a portfolio full of artwork, and I came over here to Dr. Landon Henderson and introduced myself and said, do you have an art scholarship here? And she said, no, we don't have an art scholarship. And I said, I want an art scholarship. And I'd say, would you look at my portfolio and see what y'all can do? I didn't know that was gonna work. I just came over here, a guy, some dude, thinking I could, And so what happened was, 2 weeks later, they offered me a scholarship. As a matter of fact, they offered me a scholarship on the day that I was getting ready to send out the letters to the other schools. I was supposed to go to UCLA. That's where I was supposed to go.
Oh.
I was headed west.
Oh.
I was in a program here in Durham where I could go to UCLA, and that's where I was getting ready to go. But I came to North Carolina Central, and I do not regret that.
I mean, that's real. That's real. I wouldn't regret it either. So what does it mean coming back to your alma mater and hosting like an art exhibition during homecoming?
It's amazing, man. Really, it's amazing. People don't know how amazing it is. And I told Dr. Faison, Brenda, I told her that I was honored to come back and share my work. I remember when I was here in school, I was the art club president. And coming back here and being allowed to share where I'm at now, the only thing I can say is it's just amazing. Had a chance to talk to some students, and the students here, they were like, they were just captivated. They couldn't believe it. One student said to me on the other day that most artists that come, and he said he had been to each one that's been here, the artists don't come back and talk to them. Just say artists put the work up, and sometimes they see them and sometimes they don't. And he said that you came back to talk to us. And I told him, I said, that's a responsibility. You want to know, as Dr. Faison said, you want to hear from the artist. You want to know what he was thinking when he did what he did. My thing is, I want the students to understand that they are brilliant, that they're geniuses, and they should follow their dreams, and that my mark is my mark, but your mark is your mark, but utilize your mark and don't be following the follower.
That's very inspiring. And I think it is important for especially alumni to come back and talk to the students so we can hear your stories, so we can get to where you guys are at, and we can do the same and, continue in the cycle, because it takes a village, to grow a community.
It's important. I used to come back here at homecoming, and we would go to the classes, and we would talk. And I remember we used to do that and go to the high schools also. I think sometimes what happens is that people get off course, because I got off course. And if you look at the beginning of the show, you'll see a portrait of me that's done in super realism. I was doing super realism before there was such a thing. I didn't know that's what it was till later on. And I have this eagle piece here that you see on my shirt. I have this piece. I designed this in visual communications for the senior class to do T-shirts just for their class. And you know how it is when you go to school. You go home, you come back, you get the new gear. Okay. When I came back to school, they had turned my design into plaques, to hats, to license plates, and I am livid. I'm mad. I'm going there to get my stuff, and I'm looking at everything, and I only buy one. I'm so mad. I only buy one T-shirt. I should have bought a lot of stuff to have, right? But I am mad, right? And so my great grandfather used to say, when you're mad, don't say nothing. He said, anger is what get everybody in trouble. So I always try to be calm. And so I go home and talk to my grandmother, and I'm like, I'm gonna sue the school. I don't believe this. And she says, if you sue the school, where you going to school? She says, your own scholarship, they own your work. And I'm like, I didn't think about that right. And then she said, you should be happy because they gave you an opportunity to do some work, and now you see that you can do work that people will buy. And so little things like that that has been said to me helps me to live the life I live as an artist.
So I have a couple more questions for you. So what do you hope the community gains from after viewing your show?
A sense of not seeing a black artist or a black body in this show. I don't want you to come to this show and you say, this is a black show. I want you to come to this show and say, this is a show of energy. This is a show of frequency. This is a show of color, what color can do. I talk about this show, it's a show about identity, world peace, and color. And many people ask me, what do you mean world peace? Because I want you to see this show and see the colors in this show as transformational, that you're not looking at a black image, you're looking at a colorful image that's exuding emotion. I can talk about how I got here because I was in figuration. When you look at the show and you see the early pieces, you see figuration. You still see identity. But what I'm doing here is making black lines and white lines, one being the powerful one being the light in the faces of the pieces. And it's not black against white, it's unity, utilizing black and white to bring forth the pieces. And so what I want the community to get out of it is, I want them to get out of, what is your mark on the planet? What mark are you gonna leave? This is my mark. What is your mark gonna be? When we talked a little bit earlier, and I talked about going through the different movements to get here, there are 3 people that really influenced my work. That was Ernie Barnes, because he went to Hillside, he went to Central, he was Durham. And we're watching The Good Times on TV, so, you know, I was like, I can be an artist, because there it is. And then Charles White. And Charles White influence on me came 2 different ways. One was we went to, when I was here, to a museum, and it was 200 years of African American art. And we're walking around, we're looking at all the work, and of course I'm looking to see if I see something like mine. That's just, you know, that's how I was. And we walk into this room, giant mural in the room. And I was stunned because the work looked like my work. And I was like, who is this guy? And so I found out it was Charles White. And of course, I started doing research on who Charles White is. And then I'm looking at his work, and I'm looking at where I am going at that moment in my art career, and I'm going down the same line. Now, because of Ernie Barnes and the elongated figures and the stuff that he was doing, I abandoned that. I said, no, I'm not going to be another Ernie Barnes, because again, identity is critical. And now I run into Charles White, and now I got to abandon that style, which is awesome. You know, I've had some of my professors to even say that, why did you abandon that style? And I'm like, well, I don't want to be him. It's his style. And so that's how I got to this, because I was looking for my solution. When you see my pastels, and I'm not saying this as if I'm not a good artist. I'm just saying this as my interpretation about my art. I believe just about anybody can do pastels like I do pastels. Okay, maybe not my style, but I believe most people can do that. The realism work I'm doing, I believe most people can do it. The sculpture piece that I did here that's in this show, I believe that most people can learn that skill. But when it comes to what I've created now, the pieces that you see in this show, and you start thinking about the underpainting that I did with the show, one of the reasons I did the underpainting because I wanted people who are blind to be able to put gloves on and rub against it and feel the energy that I put in the pieces and feel the actual work. It's something I don't talk about much. And when you actually look at the name of the show, which is called Human Landscapes, and what Human Landscapes means, that I use the underpainting as part of the landscape of the energy that's in the person's face. And see, I believe that's going to take a little more than a notion to do, because now you can do the black and white lines, okay, you can do the bold lines and you can draw the picture, but then when you have to do the underpainting where my memories are, where my footprint is in the work, now that's something a little different because you don't know what I was thinking at that moment in time. And so that's why this style to me is very, very profound and different from a lot of other artists. And then the other thing, I worked very hard on looking at what everybody was doing to figure out what could I do that would be different from everybody else. And I think I achieved it. 100 years from now, we'll find out did I achieve it, but I think I did achieve it. I was in conversation with a couple of my friends the other day, and they asked me the question. They said, well, if Farvism only lasted 5 years and you've done it for 20 years, who really owns the movement?
Yeah.
And I always say nobody owns the movement because art not only is freedom, it's universal for everybody.
So my last question, what advice would you give young artists trying to find their identity?
Identity. That's really what this show is about, how I got to my identity. The first thing I would say is you need to, first of all, do the research about what you want to do. When I went into my advertising agency, I did the Black Business Expo, started it, did the first one, ended up 300 booths. It's a trade show that sells black businesses to the community. And that event that I did in advertising broke records, 5,000 to 7,000 people coming to a show that had never happened before, which propelled me to work with Black Enterprise Magazine as a photographer. Delta was my sponsor, so I'm flying around first class and all this stuff. Even though I was doing Kelly Worldwide advertising agency, I still was following my mission of being an artist. And when I say do the research, many times what happens is when things don't work right now, many times people abandon their dream and start following the follower. So when you ask that question, how do you really get to identity? The only way you can get to identity is through growth. And what that means is you gotta find something that you love to do. And I know we hear it all the time. You would do it for free. That's what you gotta find. But you really gotta find something that you will do, do not just for free, but this is what you do. I have a sculpture piece that I did in '77. and I named it him in 77. Here is 2024, 2025, and everybody's talking about him. Why was it named him in 77? That's why this piece is called what? I have pieces that are called they. I have pieces that are called them. I have pieces that are called who. I have pieces that are called when, where, and how. One-word statements. And they are identifying an identity. And many times, young artists, I had a young artist while I was doing this show showed me his work. And he started out with, well, I just want you to see my work. And I'm like, yes. But he started out with the sadness of, like, he really didn't want to show it to me. He didn't believe in his work. You have to understand that it's easy to follow somebody. And it's just as easy to be a leader. It takes the same amount of time to do a small project as it does to do a large project. We have to understand, if you are searching for your identity in what you're doing, that's not an overnight success. It's something you got to keep doing. You got to keep doing. See, I would do this, and I shouldn't say it this way, but I do this all the time. Today, when I leave here, I'm going to draw something. I'm going to paint tonight. I'm going to do this because this is what I do. And young artists need to understand that they are creating their future every time they wake up. People ask me, how am I inspired? What inspires me? What motivates me? What it is? And I tell them, I say, well, what motivates me is waking up, getting that air. When I wake up, I'm ready to go. Can't tell me nothing. I woke up today, I'm ready to go. That's always been the way it's been for me. If somebody asks me to draw something right now, I can pull my pencil out, piece of paper, I go drawing. But what happens to us, we listen to the noise. And sometimes the noise is really just noise. And then we look around the room at our friends, and we don't realize that the people that we look at as our friends are us. And so then, if you're the smartest person in the group of people that you're around, you're in a cage. Because you can't grow, you can't build. And many times what happens is an artist is a genius on a higher level. And somebody can walk to that artist and say, oh man, I don't like that. And then the artist, because he's a genius and he's overthinking everything, he starts thinking about why you don't like it. As opposed to say, as I say, that's your opinion. And when we get to the point where we can look at and listen to the noise and understand that that's somebody's opinion and live on the opinion that we have, then that's how we get to where we're going. That's how I got here. Because if I had listened to my art counselor when he said that most artists were going to be starving artists, right? And then I had changed my major to visual communications, which is advertising, public relations, marketing, branding, and all that stuff. And threw my paintbrush away, threw my pencil away, threw my ink pen away because of what he said. You see what I'm saying? We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be close to here. As I say to people, whenever Mr. Famous show up and knock on your door, or Miss Famous or whatever knock on your door, they're only going to have one question. Where is the breadth of work that you have done? Where is the work at? You're not going to be able to jump up and say, oh, I can make a whole lot of work for you now. No, they're going to say, where is the breadth of work that you have right now? I listen to some of these rappers like Jay-Z. Jay-Z talks about the breadth of work that you have. I listen to CEOs that start these billion-dollar companies. When you look at Amazon and you look at the iPhone, okay, they started, they continue to move forward, and they continue to build. You're able to see their breadth of work. So when you ask about what to tell young artists, I can only say work on your breadth of work, because we don't know who loves what you do. There are 8 billion people. I've had people to come in and take pictures and videos, and they say, can I take, I say, yes. I say, it's 8 billion people on the planet. I say, it's 8 billion people on the planet. If I could get 1 billion people to buy my work, just at $1, that's $1 billion. So that's the thing that we miss out on in terms of not just artists, but people. You know, what is your operating system? How do you operate? How do you look at the strategy for your life? And many times we're not looking at it because, again, we're listening to the noise. See, I could have taken a job and retired at 65. And like many of my friends, I have artist friends who drop art, and they say, and when they see my stuff, they're like, and you kept drawing? And I'm like, what else was there to do on the planet than to keep drawing? Because that's a skill that I was given. That's something that I had inside. Why would I stop? But you stopped. Okay, so now you can't go back. It's kind of like the piece that was sold for $110 million by Basquiat. Mm-hmm. I can't go back to 1992 and redraw something if I didn't draw it in 92. Mm-hmm. And so when you ask that question, what I would say to artists is to keep working on your craft, stop listening to the noise. And I tell people all the time, somebody is waiting. Somebody is born for those lines that you're getting ready to create.
That's good advice to end on. And I think that wraps up episode 5 of the VoiceBox with Dr. Kelly.
And remember, what you're looking for is looking for you.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.